Well, hello everyone. My name's Tristan. It's nice to see some familiar faces. Today we're going to be talking about native plants for pollinators and birds. I have included other insects that aren't fully pollinating, but they aid in the garden biodiversity and, the local ecology of your garden. So I'm going to start out by just going over our regional overview. You've seen this already, but I like to do it with everyone that joins the classes. Let's see here. Zoom in. Okay. So yeah, I'll do the regional overview, go over general native plant and insect knowledge. I'll start with the insects, go into species descriptions, and then I have a bunch of resources as well in the slides that you guys can go back through and research yourself because I'm not an etymologist, but while I do have a lot of insect knowledge, there are so many useful articles out there too to kind of refer to. But yeah. Okay, so our immediate local native range is, of course, the Willamette Valley. We're a quite large basin, stretching all the way up to Washington, down to Eugene and Southern Oregon. We have the cool, wet winters with warm and dry summers. And we have a massive biodiversity of plants and pollinators alike in our valley. Let's see. And then this class will be posted on YouTube. So any of these links and stuff, you'll be able to kind of go back and get, or you can take a picture if you'd like. So these are some initiatives around town. I've worked on the Denali Creek restoration project. It's going really well. We planted a bunch of tarweed and camas out there, and it's been looking really awesome. But yeah, just a few things you guys can research and get involved in the community if you'd like. See here. Okay. So again, I'm going to go over what classifies a plant as native. Natives are very interesting in that there are scales at which we look at when grouping species. The Willamette Valley is our local range, but when you look at the West Cascades versus the Eastern Cascades, those are two very distinct regions. So typically, you're not going to be taking East Cascade plants and planting them over here. Um, and then, the North America in general is like a continental range, but we don't really typically use that unless a plant is very reproductively successful, which there are a few that, grow here and in, the middle of Montana or, in New York. And then if a plant is introduced by humans, it is not native. Specifically when you're talking about like Western colonization, plants that are brought over that way, via shipping or planes, all those different travel methods. And then I do like to kind of touch on cultivars and cloning every time I talk. Just because something is a hybrid or it's been bred for certain traits doesn't mean it's ecologically unuseful. Like for instance, the King Edward Ribosanguineum still has its nectaries, it's gonna be beneficial. The bugs can still recognize it as useful, but some plants have been bred so far out of their natural form that the insects just don't recognize it as their traditional food source and they will not go to it. So it's kind of good to look at those kind of hybrids and cultivars as a case by case basis and kind of use your knowledge from your garden and kind of figure out what may work and what won't work. But yeah, it's up to the individual to decide. But I know that is quite a controversial topic in the native plant world. Let's see. Yeah, and then why do we like to cultivate native plants? There are quite a few different benefits. Of course, there's the environmental benefits. They help increase our local biodiversity, support all of our pollinators, our birds. They really help improve soil health. When you look at certain invasive weeds, root systems compared to native plants tend to go down very deep, have fibrous roots. They'll help control erosion. A lot of weeds have a really fast taproot that can really go very deep and be really hard and outcompete native plants basically for nutrients and water. So They definitely have their benefits and are adapted to these soil conditions. And then water conservation is another one. Native plants are adapted to our precipitation patterns, and they're going to thrive in what we consider like those dry, hot summers. There also can be low maintenance in the sense that they don't need fertilizer, they don't need a lot of irrigation. However, if you're gonna incorporate them into the garden, I have to prune a lot of my native plants because they can really get scraggly and aesthetically they can get a little bit crazy. But if you prune them, it's totally fine. That's what I always tell people. Don't be afraid to prune. And then, yeah, they have an amazing aesthetic value. Like a lot of the foliage of a lot of our native plants is really fascinating. If you're not just going for flower blooms and stuff like that, they're really pretty. But yeah, and not to mention the insects that they attract. There's a lot of really cool ones that I'm going to talk about in a minute. Okay, so pollinators and keystone species. Have you guys heard of a keystone species before? Okay. So yeah, I mean, in this context, they're plants that provide numerous benefits to the local food web, and a key factor is without them, there would be local ecological collapse within, especially specifically within like food webs, and when you look at those systems. And then there are two types of keystone species that I've recognized. There's host plants that feed larval young, and then plants that supply food for specialist pollinators, such as like hummingbirds and then all the various types of bees and such. So yeah, that's kind of what we're basing a lot of this off of. Um, let's see. Yes.
Could you give examples of keystone species?
Yes, I will be talking about those in just a second. But for instance, Oregon white oak is a keystone species for that oak savanna habitat. Perfect. Yeah. Um, let's see. So yeah, so now I'm gonna just go over the pollinator groups that I've, identified and pulled out. This is in no way fully comprehensive, especially when I'm talking about specific species, but just to give you an idea of the categories of the pollinators that exist in the Willamette Valley. So of course, we have our bumblebees. We have quite a wide variety of them around here. My favorite is the Western bumblebee. They're really notable by their white band on the back of their little thorax. Um, they love various like early flowering bulbs and stuff, like the shooting stars that I'll talk about later. But yeah, we have many PNW native species. And then mason bees have their, signature metallic thorax and stuff like that. There's quite a few of those. And the reason they're called mason bees is because of the way that they create their nests, and they use mud. So whenever people are cultivating mason bees, it's really important to kind of have those resources in the yard, and creating a semi-wetland area so they can actually collect that is really important. The most common one you guys likely see is the blue orchard bee. And then next, we have sweat bees. Now, these are ground nesters. Some farmers, specifically in Washington, will use the alkali bees as pollinators because they're very generalist and really efficient at pollinating. The reason they're called alkali is they like salt beds. So farmers will, cultivate salt beds on the outside perimeter of their crops and stuff, and they'll nest in there, and then early in the spring they'll come out and pollinate really efficiently. So those are one of the only sweat bees that are really cultivated in that way. But yeah, there's others in the PNW like the ligated furrow bee and the metallic green sweat bee. I feel like the metallic green one I see all the time around my yard. And then one of my favorites are the leafcutter bees. These ones are quite interesting because they nest in open cavities in your yard, so wood, old stems. So that's why it's good to kind of leave, old stems and things from the previous year because that can really act as a habitat to attract all of these good pollinators. I've found that dead wood is what they really prefer in my yard. So I leave like dry pieces of wood that I've collected in a pile, and they nest in those cavities, and it's been quite successful. So yeah. They're very, very good ones. And it's cool because they don't actually eat the leaves. They use it as a nesting medium, basically. And they also feed on nectar and pollen. So, yeah. And then cuckoo bees. Now, these are not going to be pollinators, but they are a healthy indicator of an indicator of a healthy ecosystem. So I really wanted to include them because, when we're talking about pollinators, it's good to include all the insects because you really want to, have high biodiversity in your garden. And I will say, using pesticides, I've actually strayed away from doing that because I found when you let mosquitoes get to a high point in their population, you will inevitably attract like dragonflies and other predatory insects to the garden. And typically, they will stabilize populations on their own if you let them. So I just think that's something that's been really fascinating and something you're not really taught very much in our society. So yeah, definitely if you're overbuying all these pesticides, try to biologically control and just have some patience. And then mining bees. These ones are the one that I see the most is the ligated furrow bee. These are also ground nesters, and they are very important. They're also very specialized typically. I have different charts that I'll show you that have specific species, but yeah. Next. Oh, yes. So these are some really interesting charts that I pulled from OSU and then the National Wildlife Federation. These you'll probably have to go back and kind of, look at more, but they basically did studies on the species richness on each of these native species of flowering plants. And as you can see, the California poppy and the Douglas aster have the highest biodiversity and species richness. So that just means that there were more species and different species on those plants. It's quite fascinating. These are all species that I typically sell here. Um, but yeah, it's really fascinating. I definitely want you guys to look into that if you're interested. It's really a good read, and it's not super long. But yeah, and then on the right, there are the top 30 native host plants for pollen specialist bees. And the National Wildlife Federation, they did their study, west of the Cascades. So it's Washington, Oregon, and then Northern California a little bit. So it's kind of a more broad study. And then, yeah. Oh, and I wanted to mention with mining bees, the way you can tell if they're in your yard, you'll see little like volcano-esque looking mounds of dirt in your yard, and those are typically what they are gonna be manifesting as. Let's see. Oh yeah, I'll let you take a pic.
Okay.
hmm Yeah, and if you guys need me to slow down or take a pic, just let me know. Perfect. Okay, and then here's another chart from the same graph that was on the left. This is also from OSU, just a different visualization. This one I think is mainly the species richness. So there are 74 different pollinators observed. And this was a pretty short observation window as well. So this is not a comprehensive number, but it's fascinating to see how many actually were observed on these. Globegilia is a really good one that I love. Whenever I plant that and seed it in my yard, I have countless pollinators going over there. A lot of hoverflies and stuff like that. Yarrow's on there, Oregon Sunshine, and rose checker mallows are really good larval hosts too. So those are a really good one to put in the yard. But it's kind of fascinating just how useful the Douglas aster is to a lot of these pollinators. Yeah, and then let's see. Hummingbirds. So the only birds in the PNW that are technically pollinators are hummingbirds. The flowers that they prefer are very distinct. They're tubular flowers. Typically bees aren't going to them as well. It's very specialist in that aspect. The hummingbirds I see the most around here are rufous hummingbirds and the Anna's hummingbird. We actually had a rufous yesterday. Got in the store and I had to like bribe it out with a bunch of plants by the door. I was like, no, don't get trapped in here. Don't die. But yeah, I know. We really need windows up the top of those glass windows up there. But yeah, I love the hummingbirds. And then beetles. So these are not, in the past, like evolutionarily, they were pretty big pollinators, but now bees and other pollinators have kind of succeeded them. But there are a few like checker beetles, longhorn beetles. This picture is bear grass. So this is going to be growing in the Cascade Mountains and a little more east of the Cascades, but still some populations are down here as well. And beetles really do love them. They bloom every 5 years typically. They also bloom after wildfire, so they're one of those fire adapted species. Love the bear grass. And also they're good for fauna too, like deer. They will eat those. Bears will eat them. But yeah. Okay, and then Diptera, so moths and butterflies. There are numerous species of moths and butterflies. A lot of people, the public in general, are very interested in them, and for good reason. They provide food for many predatory insects. They control invasive species like the field crescent. The picture on the left is that was actually an introduced species for biological control. Now, typically, the introduced species never end well. But these ones are specific to eating, what is it called? It's a tansies. So they only eat tansy, which is an invasive plant. So it's actually one of those that succeeded in its quest to lower that invasive plant population. Um, Other ones that I see a lot are morning cloaks. I've seen some satyr commas and green commas. But yeah, and moths, the only difference between butterflies and moths, butterflies fold their wings and hold them in their backs. Moths fold them flat. So that's the main difference. There are day flying moths. They're not only at night. So yeah, let's see. And a lot of the moths will use asters and goldenrod as larval hosts for their eggs and stuff. Yeah, so this is another one of those charts with the plants ranked, and I could not fit it very well on here. But these are some of those keystone plants for butterflies and moths. Really useful chart. I have this in the back, so if you guys need it, I can send it over. Oh, aster and goldenrod. Let's see. I'll write it in the chat for you. Okay, moving on. Let's see. And then flies. So flies get a bad rap, but there are a lot of biodiverse aspects to their populations. Syrphid flies or hoverflies are one of my favorites. I see the globetails, the western aphid eaters all the time. They're really good at mimicking bees. It's a protective strategy. A lot of predators don't want to eat bees, so it's really useful for them to kind of camouflage in that way. Drone flies also do the mimicry, but to a great extent. It's really hard to tell. The only way I can really tell is their wings and the eyes. That's how you really tell if it's a drone fly. And then taconid flies are actually parasitoids. So they will lay their eggs and then, I think certain aphids will eat them. And then they basically reproduce inside of them. And they're really good at controlling populations. They take a minute though to actually go through that life cycle. Um, but yeah, hoverflies, they help pollinate, they control pests, and they also help nutrient cycling within your garden. And especially if you're trying to get rid of aphids and thrips and such, they're a great way to go. Um, yeah, aphid eaters, they can feed on hundreds of aphids within a day. It's kind of wild. But these guys will benefit from reduced garden cleanup. So if you leave leaf litter, sticks, stuff like that, they can actually nest in there and aren't going to be disturbed. That'll increase their populations. Let's see. So this is another chart I found, kind of comparing the different Flies. These are, I think, just hoverflies. Yeah, just hoverflies. So, kind of going through their species richness, and kind of categorizing whether they're larvae or predators, decomposers, or herbivores. So there's quite a mix of different niches they fill within the ecology of your garden. But really cool. Love the way they hover and they provide a cool aesthetic to the garden. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the plants. So, great keystone species, Oregon white oak. We do sell these typically, but I will get them through special order when people actually request them. Um, but these are a great addition if you, especially if you have quite a bit of land. Obviously, they can get quite large. You know, they create a really diverse and unique ecosystem under their canopies. So there's quite a few different bulbs like Brodia, certain camas that can go under the canopy that really thrive under there. They provide food for many different small invertebrates. Obviously, wasps. There's a high diversity of different wasps that create galls in there. I know you guys typically see the big round ones, but there's some that it's kind of interesting. When I was doing research for this, there's some that create like millimeter wide galls. There's many different forms of them. One question I had though, because I wasn't sure, is why the galls form differently, because I know the galls are a reaction by the tree. So that's something I wanted to research more. But yeah, they're really easy once they're established, don't need to be irrigated. Birds specifically nest a lot in these trees. The mistletoe, the parasitoid plant, grows extensively in these, and birds feed on them during December and those really deep winter months. So they provide a really good forage for the birds. There's a few different, like I have four wasps listed over here: the fimbriate gall wasp, twig gall wasp. So they all basically parasitize different parts of the plant. Some are just the leaf, some are just the stem, or different branching parts. Um, a few of the different birds that I've observed nesting in these trees are western wood pewees, Bullock's orioles, goldfinches, and the brown creepers. Oh yeah, and also ants will collect honeydew from the aphids that go on these trees. So it really is just a nice mini ecosystem that these trees create. And then Acer circinatum, so the vine maple. These are going to be your more shade tolerant trees. They can stay quite small. Um, and their flowers have a really high abundance, all the maples really, but they have a really dense panicle. So insects don't really have to travel very far to get their nutrients. So they are quite popular by a lot of caterpillar larvae. It's a larval host for many different moths. The western tiger swallowtail is one of note. But yeah, a very good, and I do carry these very often. And there are a few cultivars. With these cultivars, the bark is a different color, so that would not act very well. Like the insects aren't going to recognize it very well, so it's best to get the wild version if you're going for, creating that type of ecosystem in your yard. And then one of my favorites is your macrophyllum. So again, larval host. A lot of hummingbirds I have noticed go to these guys. I think it has to do with their cover and the dense panicles they have. And they will bloom in around April through June. It depends on the location. But these are very crucial habitat for many cavity nesters and different birds. So yeah. That's all the trees I have for you guys. Going into shrubs, I have the Oregon grape. These are really good for hummingbirds, different early pollinators like some mason bees. So they provide forage in those early seasons. They're evergreen, which is really nice. And they are also our larval host for different moths. They nest on the underside of the leaves down there. Mahonia typically grows in drier shade, so it's a pretty good spot for a lot of insects. It's protected from that over all of our winter moisture. So yeah. A lot of birds also, since they have those spiky leaves, will nest if it's big enough in the cavities in the bushes. So kind of like barberries in that sense. Let's see. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention. Birds will also eat the berries. We do not like them, but birds like them. And then Osoberry is another really good one. I started with the early bloomers. They provide nectar for hummingbirds that are just getting here from their migratory paths. Um, Really adaptable. If you're trying to fill in a space in the back of your property or wherever, they will take over, not in an aggressive way per se, but if you let them, they will fill in and create kind of a thicket. I'm sure you see all around all the different Ommelaria growing. But yeah, really loved by hummingbirds and different mason bees and moths. So yes.
Is this also called a snowberry?
No, so that is a different one.
Different, similar.
In a different genus, but the snowberries, I can see why you get it confused.
It's the berry.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like,
Yeah.
wow.
So snowberries have their berries right now, so they look white. Those are the Ommelaria berries over there. They're kind of large, they're like this big. Birds really like them, and different like small rodents animals as well. Yes.
When it says moist, can handle water sites.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Do you have to water it?
Yeah, so let's say you planted one now. In the summer, if we had a really long period of drought, you'd have to water it really deeply, like once every 2 weeks. But once it's established, you're good to go because they can actually colonize pretty dry sites. But the reason I put moist with the exclamation point is because they are wetland plants too. So they can handle inundated soil in the winter. So they're kind of great in that aspect because I know some of us have really low spots in our yards. So it can be quite versatile in that way, but very low maintenance. Yeah.
That's the difference between a native that likes to be in fir trees
Mm.
as compared to oaks.
Like you're talking about the acidity and different.
Yeah.
Yeah, I not fully, but I can kind of tell you which ones will do better under those conditions. You do. Okay. Okay. So you have both ecotypes.
Yes.
Yes, that is a big difference. I will, if I see some that are in here, I'll definitely let you know. Oh, malaria does grow okay under oaks though. So that is something you could do. They don't really prefer the acidic soil though. Um, let's see. And then red elderberries. So these are ones that grow very well under conifers. So that's one you could think about. Birds love the berries, and the white panicles of flowers are again really beneficial for numerous bees, leafcutters, different mason bees, but not really mason bees because they are a bit later of a bloomer. So definitely still beneficial because they're during that late midsummer. But these are going to be really good in the fall too to attract different birds and stuff. But yeah, really good under conifer forest. If you go down to Echo Basin in the Cascades, there's a whole massive grove of them. It's really pretty. So yeah, they can get quite large, but again, pruning is essential if you want to keep them tamed. Their counterpart, the blue elderberry, gets much larger. So keep that in mind. But those berries people typically use for syrups and such. This is one of my favorites. I have it back there in the first plant, but it's Vaccinium ovatum or evergreen huckleberry. These have a very high density of flowers. They're extremely small, but hummingbirds are obsessed with them. So if you're really trying to attract hummingbirds, that's the way to go. They provide nesting habitat. Um, and I don't really typically see very many bees on them, besides bumblebees and hummingbirds. Those are the main pollinators that I observe. But they are amazing and they bloom for quite a while. So mine is started blooming a week ago, and it'll probably bloom until the end of April, going into May. And then the berries you can harvest and make a really good jam out of, or leave them for the birds. But yeah, really beneficial plant for the garden. They can get quite large, but again, they can be hedged or shaped however you kind of see fit. Let's see here. Okay, and then ocean spray. So again, there's kind of a trend here. The plants with dense panicles of flowers are really beneficial. Ocean spray is also a larval host plant for many different butterflies and moths, like Lorcan's admiral, gray hair streak, spring azures, and such. Um, butterflies typically are kind of lazy. They don't want to have to travel between plants. So with these, they do not have to travel very far. They can kind of stay on the same plant and gather necessary resources. Not hummingbird favorite because they don't have the structure to actually get the nectar, but very good for different bees and carpenter bees specifically. And then also one of my favorite bees that love this plant, they're called fairy bees. They're very, very small, but they are all over these at my house. So really good choice for shade gardens too. Let's see. And then here we are. So the red flowering currants. These ones have been bred and shipped all throughout the world. One of the PNW favorites, I would say, globally. Um, like I was saying before with you guys, these cultivars are still beneficial to pollinators because they haven't been modified too much, just their growth form. So the insects can still recognize them as a plant that they've predated on and used as resource for a long time. They are very early bloomers. As you can see, they're going to be blooming from now through April. And yeah, King Edward is going to be one that will stay pretty small. Like the hedge in that photo is a King Edward. So, and then the one on the right is more of the wild version. There's also, I think it's called the white icicle, so it's been bred for white. So you do have to think about that though, because the insects probably won't recognize that as their traditional forage. So those ones might not be as effective as, the pink varieties. And they also have a really pretty yellow fall color. So add some fall interest for you. Let's see here. Ah, yes. We know this guy. So this is our showy milkweed. In the valley, there are two main kinds of milkweed that are useful. There's Asclepias fascicularis, which I can't typically get my hands on very much, but that is another one that grows locally. It has lanceolate leaves rather than the broad ones of the showy milkweed. These are going to be larval hosts for, of course, monarchs. They eat the leaves, and then insects that want to predate on them don't like the taste. So it's a very important plant for them. It protects them from predation and allows them to go through their life cycle. So definitely one to plant and really increase your biodiversity. But monarchs are really struggling. It's quite hard and disheartening, but still is important, and we should try. And a lot of people get milkweed wrong because they plant the tropical varieties or the wrong ones, and that does not protect monarchs. And it also confuses them and makes them stay rather than migrate. So definitely good to get the right kind. But yeah, this one is the one that's most commonly available. And then, oh yeah, Pacific bleeding hearts. So bumblebees really like these. They're early bloomers. And bumblebees are typically early pollinators. And what's interesting about them is they also attract ants because they have I forgot what it's called, but it's a little sugar growth on their seeds, and ants will take that to their nests and eat the sugars on the seed, and then the seed will germinate in the anthill. So it's kind of a way of dispersal for them. But yeah, really interesting, lovely plant, great for shade gardens, and also provide habitat on the underside of the leaves for different larval insects. Let's see. And really easy to propagate. If you dig them up and cut the root in half, you can propagate them quite well. And then Dodecatheon. This is a classic PNW. We have numerous different species, but this is the one that's most widely available. Um, They do great under oak trees, different broadleaf deciduous trees that let the sun in. And bumblebees love these. They're specifically specialized to allow bumblebees to pollinate through the process of sonication or just the buzzing. That's how they get the pollen out. They have to vibrate the flower. So yeah, they have developed that mutualistic relationship. They are quite site specific, kind of like fawn lilies and different ground covers. So you want rich, well-draining soil. But once they're established, you're good to go. They're very pretty. And I just brought some in, so definitely check them out. Mhm. All right. And then, so we have numerous different varieties of checker blooms. There's the most common one that I see, Q6 checker bloom. There's the rose checker bloom, Virgata, Nelsoniana. That one's quite rare, but these are all very important to different insects. They act as larval hosts. So when the larvae emerge, they can feed on the leaves and such. And they bloom constantly. So they'll be blooming from around May and then continue blooming all the way through fall. I typically get two big bloom sessions from them. So one in the beginning of summer and then one in late summer. Very good long blooming one. And then, there's certain bees that are specialists and only use them as host plants. So the Didacia or the globe mallow bee is one in particular. And different. The Fender's Blue is another one that's very in trouble, but it's actually gained some population numbers in recent years, so that's good to see. And then Delphinium trolifolium, or poison larkspur, is another one that is pollinated a lot by bumblebees and different minor bees too. So these guys are abundant, especially if you go to like McDonald Dun Forest. They're all over there, and these grow in conifer and broadleaf forests, so they can handle kind of both. But very vibrant flowers. They're gorgeous, and a lot of different pollinator experiments at OSU have been done on these guys. So it's kind of interesting. They'll use glow in the dark powder and track where the bees are going to kind of figure out how far they forage and stuff like that. So really interesting. But yeah, spring to early summer bloomer, and don't plant this if you have livestock because they are poisonous. So be wary, but nonetheless very important. And then the Douglas aster. These are all over, but nonetheless very important to have in the garden, as I've hopefully conveyed to you guys. Um, like in that study, they observed 74 different species in just that short observation period. They can handle really many different ecosystem types, but they really prefer well draining. So growing on the side of a slope is really good for them. Full sun to part shade is okay. And yeah, they can really spread quite vigorously and get quite tall. You will have numerous pollinators if you get these guys. And I'll be getting some later in the season. But yeah, in specific, there's monarchs that feed on these, and also fairy bees and soldier beetles will go on these guys too.
Do they spread by seed? Do they?
Yes, so thank you. I almost forgot. The seed tuft, it's like cotton kind of. And birds will use that as well as like nesting material, like hummingbirds. So yes, they are wind dispersed mainly. Let's see. And then the common yarrow. So these are going to be moth and butterfly favorites. Bees as well, but the Diptera are or Lepidoptera are very happy with these guys. They, like the checker mellows, will continue blooming all summer through fall until we get that first hard frost. They are really useful because of the dense panicle of flowers. And there are cultivars that are different colors, like but that's natural. There's the pink varieties, and those are still going to be beneficial nonetheless. So definitely don't stray away from that. But a lot of the different yarrow you see are derived from these ones in the PNW. Yeah, and then so those are the main plants that I wanted to touch on. And then these are the links that I provided. National Wildlife Federation, and then there's an Oregon White Oak and Wildlife article. That one really talks about plants that thrive under oaks and the benefits and the different ecosystems they cultivate under their canopies. And these are my citations. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. And are there any questions? I did want to honorably mention some other plants. Thistle is a really, really good plant. I know it can be a little scary, but it is a very beneficial pollinator plant. So definitely, and birds and hummingbirds also really like them because they are kind of protected by the bristles on them. Black hawthorn is another really good bird plant. They eat the berries and they also are protected by the bark because they have different thorns on there. So, yeah, that's kind of all I have for you. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Have a great day.